right, welcome everyone to our last live session of this month's ACWR virtual conference. So glad that so many of you were able to join us throughout every week of the month and saw so many faces continually through this entire series. So we're so glad that you could join us mostly on Thursdays, one Friday. And I just wanted to say, if you didn't get the weekly roundup email, please let me know and I'll be sure to send it to you, because that email includes a link to our conference evaluation form, which is entirely digital. It's the same format that you used for the registration form. So you'll recognize it when you see it. And that's going to help us kind of determine what sort of content we'll do going forward and what format it'll be in. So it's going to be very helpful for us as we move forward. And I also will have PowerPoint presentations to share from today's live session and sort of a final roundup email next week. So stay tuned for that. And then we'll also be sharing about the upcoming mentoring Zoom, which will be in late October. So I'll share that date in the final roundup email. So be sure to look for that next week. Let's see, otherwise, just be sure to check out the video gallery if you did miss any of the live sessions this month. They're all currently available, and then this session will be available hopefully by early next week. And I believe the way our webmaster had to set it up because of space, they're going to be available for 30 days from when they were posted. So be sure to watch the earliest sessions first, because they'll probably be coming off in the next couple weeks. But there will be some videos available through most of October. So if you get a chance, that video gallery link is in your weekly roundup email. And then otherwise, hopefully in the next month, we'll be working on finalizing the fall newsletter. So we'll be sending information about that out on the ACWR listserv, and of course on the Facebook page. And speaking of, Scott Kiefer with the Technology Committee shared the next campaign for October, which will be focusing on featuring some of our different spaces, either our repository spaces, heritage rooms, or reading areas, whichever you'd be interested in sharing. So feel free to look for that on the listserv and get in touch with Scott if you'd like to submit for that campaign. So those were the items I had on my list for the weekly roundup. And in terms of the business meeting, normally at our in-person conference, I usually do a quick overview of what we've been doing with ACWR, but I feel like so much of that has been covered with our weekly welcome sessions. I will say, I don't know if we've mentioned this before. If you aren't a regular member of ACWR, we have published a new edition of the Women Religious Resource Directory, which should be available. If it isn't already, it will be very soon through the Catholic Research Resource Alliance. And it's also on our website under the Resources tab. So if you'd like to submit your community for that, please feel free to contact the national office, because we do publish new editions usually every 3 to 6 months. So otherwise, for the last 6 months or so, it's definitely been very conference focused, because this was an entirely new endeavor for us. So kind of reinventing the wheel in many ways. So that's been the bulk of what we've been doing in the national office outside of our ACWR Zoom series, and just coordinating the listserv, helping to connect members with answers to their various questions. So yep, that's a little bit about my end of things. And then I'll be sharing my screen to share some financial reports. Oh boy, I'm frozen. That's not good. Oh no. Okay, my computer's frozen. So, okay, I'm not frozen anymore, but let me X out of some things, because I think I'm upsetting the computer by having too much open. Okay, so hopefully, well, okay. Hopefully you are able to see this screen.
Yes.
So on let's see, let me scroll here. These are some charts that our treasurer, Carol Nugent, put together showing our income and expenses for the last really 2 years, because you have 2019, 2020, and 2020, 2021. So because we haven't been traveling, usually our board travels 2 times a year to meet in person, but we've been doing those through Zoom. So that's been a big savings. And then our new treasurer since 2019 put us into a different investment firm. And that's really paid off. And as well as the economy, everyone's really been doing well with investments over the last couple of years. So you'll see those. And otherwise, she also put, and I'll see if you guys can see this. On my end, it blocks with the squares. So I'm going to try to move the squares so in case they block your view. But essentially, it just shows the bulk of our income has been through investments and the member dues. And we've been using that to help coordinate so many of these new initiatives that we've been doing through ACWR and hope to continue to do next year. And so Casey's going to be sharing some of that strategic vision that we're hoping to put forth. And otherwise, expenses, I'm a big part of that. And then our webmaster too, Sue DiTullio, who's just been really phenomenal with all of the additional work that's been involved with forming new pages for the conference and the video galleries. So really worthwhile, but that's—
You're worth every penny, Veronica.
Thank you. So I'm going to stop sharing and hope that my computer doesn't freeze. Okay. All righty. Well, that's everything I had to share for the business meeting. So I guess we can take a bit of a break before we go on to the 1 o'clock session.
Welcome everybody to our last morning session for this year's Triennial. I'm Sarah Cantor, and this session that we will be in for the next 90 minutes is called Embracing Archival Standards, Putting Old Wine into New Wineskins. And we will have 3 presenters, Malachy McCarthy, Holly Fiedler, and Jaja Young. These speakers will address the significance of adopting archival standards and its resulting benefits to the religious archives, including improved access. And I am going to go ahead and introduce all 3 of them, and then they will all 3 present, and then we will have time for questions at the end. So you are welcome to save your questions for the end, but if you want to type them into the chat, then I can read them off to them at the end as well. So either way is just fine. So our first presenter today, Malachy McCarthy, is the province archivist of the Claretian Missionaries USA, Canada province, located in Chicago. Malachy has advanced degrees in library science, Latin American history, and a PhD in U.S. history from Loyola University, Chicago. Very active in the archival world, Malachy founded the Chicago Area Religious Archives Group in 2007, and that same year launched a week-long workshop entitled Introductory Archival Workshop for Religious Communities, which was offered biennially from 2007 to 2016, and some of you may have taken that yourselves. He has held leadership positions in the Catholic Library Association and other professional organizations. In 2017, Malachy initiated planning for the Boston College Conference entitled Envisioning the Future of Catholic Religious Archives, a working conference, held in July of 2018. The meeting led to the formation of archival resources for Catholic collections in February 2020. His primary interest has been the preservation of American Catholic materials and making them accessible to the wider community. Malachy will be our first speaker. Our next speaker will be Holly Fiedler. And Holly is province archivist for the Sisters of St. Francis of Penance and Christian Charity, Sacred Heart Province in Denver, Colorado, where she has served since October of 2019. Previously, Holly worked at Colorado State University, Morgan Library, Digital and Archive Services for 6 years, where she generated metadata and performed ingests into the digital repository, created EAD finding aids, did archival processing, oversaw student scanning projects, and digitized various artifacts and media, as well as supporting preservation. Holly has worked in archives for 10 years, 2 years before that in museum collection management, and before that, 14 years in conservation. She has a Master's of Art in Conservation, 3 Bachelors of Science, and has held the Society of American Archivists Digital Archives Specialist, the DAS certification, since January 2016. Our final speaker of the morning will be Jaja Yang, and Jaja has worked and volunteered at various archives since 2013. She received her Master of Library and Information Studies degree from the University of Alberta in 2016. She is currently the archivist for the Franciscan Archives of Western Canada in Edmonton and the assistant archivist at the Musée Héritage Museum Archives in St. Albert, Alberta. She is also a member of the Database Committee for the Archive Society of Alberta. So please welcome our panelists, and Malachy, you are welcome to take it away.
Very good. Does everybody see? I can't seem to go forward my screen for some reason. What did this? It won't. My screen won't move. Oh, there we are. All right, we can begin. I think I figured it out. 44 years ago, I began my career as a reference librarian at St. Anselm College. I quickly learned the reference collection by putting into practice what I learned at library school. Interested in history and theology, I already knew local resources and how to use them. My challenge would be discovering reference sources related to literary, scientific, and basic reference tools. The colors of the volumes, the location of the reference collection became beacons for answering many questions that came across my desk and became second nature as I improved my understanding and use of the collection. And many of you who started out as reference librarians can realize this kind of visual beacons you always developed. Similarly to Lone Ranger archivists, who apply the same practices. We know our collections so well that instead of understanding the relationships between the tools we know, we take the easy way out and get the job done. However, it is that a means to locate all the information on the topic. Unfortunately, the library science and yes, the archives have gradually changed. The application of technology toward organization of information has depersonalized our profession. With the adoption of OPAC, a little used term today, online public access catalog, did away with the security of the card catalog and the intimate knowledge I had of those wonderful reference tomes. I think if anybody was raised on the card catalog, you either walked through the shelves or you looked at the subject tracings. That is no longer. This was brought home to me a few years ago when I called Loyola University Chicago and asked them to check on a book on their ready reference shelf, the Chicago Archdiocesan Directory. However, much to my surprise, ready reference no longer existed, and the reference librarian had to query the catalog to find the book and bring it back to the desk to respond to my inquiry. We were no longer in Oz, and standards became a way of life in understanding our collections. Just so you know, this information commons at Loyola, which was heralded as kind of the new look of libraries, doesn't have one book in it, really, hardly. Reference does, but the whole thing is digital. The archival world, and especially the Lilliputian terrain of religious archives, ignored the professionalization of information management. It was believed that our collections were too small for these complicated programs. The archivist was convinced that one knew the collection inside and out, and any response could be unearthed quickly. However, today, that is not so much the case. Once the environment of a leisure class, archives have now become the ultimate storage of the community's history and legacy. As ministries and buildings close and members move to eternal life, many archivists become overwhelmed by the sheer amount of records dropped off at their doorstep, and I'm sure that's sometimes literally. Where in the past, the concern was to provide leadership with materials from meetings and committee minutes, today people want access to various ministries, records that could be in paper, image, digital, or electronic format. Putting one's hands on these documents is challenging, to say the least. Reliance on the old ways of doing things fails when up against the crush of the paper tsunami. One solution to confront this problem is the application of standards. Lone Ranger archivists have been reluctant to implement them across collections, as their archives reflect generations of labor by a predecessor archivist. Yet in order to get a handle on collections, developing simple standards entered into a database like Google Sheets, Microsoft Excel, FileMaker Pro, or similar software programs, location of information can be enhanced and offers a new way to mine community archives. This feature even becomes more critical if your community is facing completion and is contemplating depositing the collection in a consolidated or collaborative archive. Fields within a standard database can be exported and manipulated into archival management systems. I think the critical thing here is to really start using these spreadsheets, because spreadsheets, basically the ones I mentioned, can always be imported into content management systems. Obviously, the next question is, what standards should we apply? I think one needs to determine the basic elements that would allow the archivist or user to locate information. In applying standards, I think you should select those that you feel confident you can apply. It is pointless to embrace a multiplicity of standards unless you are committed to using them. I believe there are a few that are very critical. Before outlining various standards, I think it's important that you have a uniform file format in identifying materials. They should conform to a standard so the records can be found without effort and returned to their proper place. So the first standard I want to talk about is authority files, because this really will determine what is officially your name according to Library of Congress. Now, the reason why Library of Congress is so critical is the major standard for the United States, and Canada uses it primarily in the English-speaking world. So if a researcher is going to look for materials, they're going to use LC. So one of the critical things is, what do we call ourselves? I bring up the Ursuline Sisters. So these are all official authority records of the Ursuline Sisters. And you see, you have the Ursuline Sisters of Three Rivers, Trois Rivières. You have the Ursulines of Cincinnati and various things. You should start applying these immediately to your collection in order to be able to link those. I'll give you an example. The Claretian Missionaries, everybody knows as the Claretian Missionaries, but their official title is Sons of the Immaculate Heart of Mary. So we would be lost if I used the term Sons of the Immaculate Heart of Mary. The LC standard is Claretian Missionaries, and that's how we do all our tracings. The next thing is names. This is critical, again, not that you're going to do everybody's name, but for important names like this would be, I pulled this up because of George Mundelein, which you see on number 10. George Mundelein, George William, 1872 to 1939. He plays prominently in Chicago. We do have photographs of him, and that is an authority file that we will use and put in the subject headings. So that is a format that you really could use for some of your collections. The other thing to do with authority files is really, you need to have a standard that is going to be the basis of your collection. Now, the Claretians have what we call the Catalogues. And the Catalogues is the international directory of all the Claretians in the world. So this lists everybody. And if you go looking for this, and we have a whole run of these from 1922, I believe. But if you want to find deceased, there's also, and many of you I'm sure use this, it's the necrology of the Claretian members. So use those as your standard. With the Claretians, we have difficulty in the sense that it is a Spanish order, which means that we have to employ diacritic marks and when we enter material into our basis. And Americans kind of say, well, that's pointless. Why do we do that? But it is the international standard. So we need to go back and enter all the diacritical marks in names. So right now we are up on Content-DM, which is a public site, and we're using Access to Memory, which is our manuscript site, but is a private at this time. Ministry place names is another critical thing. Is how do we term ministry place names? And again, you have to go to a uniform source, which really for the United States is the official Catholic directory. And this starts in 1817 to the current. So it's still applied. Now it is pretty much online. But virtually in deciding what to call a ministry, use the standards set up by the official Catholic directory. I'll give you an example where the Claretian collections are problematic. La Placita is a church, Our Lady Queen of the Angels in downtown Los Angeles, which we ran from 1910 till about 2018. That is called La Placita by the people of the area. But the little plaza, but it really is Our Lady Queen of the Angels. So we have to use that term. Another one is our Solitude, which is Our Lady of Solitude. So that's another thing. So you really, in order for people to find your materials, you really have to use those nomenclature. So I would say the official Catholic directory, which lists any officially recognized ministry in the United States over time, is where one should go. The other thing is when you use, this should follow when you use your file folders. You should really apply standards across the way. So anything you are writing down as a standard, and I don't expect you to go back and change all your file folders, but you can do it this way. The advantage to going to electronic files is that you can change any material at any time. So if you want to manipulate any type of heading, you can do that. Now we have the big one, Library of Congress subject headings, which of course for everybody is problematic. And I would say it can be difficulty, but it's a standard tool for subject tracings in the US and Canada. And although confusing at times, in utilizing an older nomenclature, Library of Congress subject headings provides archivists and users access to collections no matter where the material is housed. Now, this is the other point I think that we have to realize, is that in the future, we may not be managing our collections. So in order to prepare them for other users to find stuff, it is best to try and implement standard subject headings. So I would advise people to start applying Library of Congress subject headings. Now, I did this when I indexed the Voice of St. Jude from 1935 to 1968, which took about 3 months. And I used Library of Congress subject headings. Once you begin to use it, the same similar subject headings will apply. So you can kind of get used to what you're looking for, so to speak. But this is, let me go through the next slide. So this is, for example, chapters. this is critical. This is kind of interesting. So chapters are in the Library of Congress subject headings. If you call chapters, you call assemblies, and you have to look it up. But general chapters, and you could put Claretians, or we put the, you know, the 19th general chapter. And for us, a general chapter would be the international chapter. Provincial chapters is something else. So just make sure you do a kind of a standard on that regard. Another one that's really problematic, and remember the Library of Congress is a Protestant based subject standard. So Lord's Supper, parentheses, liturgy, is the Mass. They don't use the term Eucharist, although Mass is available, but you would have probably both. So that's something to consider. One of the things that I found very helpful in my use of applying these things is to create an access database of all your subject headings you use. And because we're using two systems, we're using Content DM for images, and we're using access to memory for manuscripts, a common subject heading file is very, very helpful. So this has, for example, if you look at assemblies, religious, we find that that's a Library of Congress subject heading. You can make up your own. For example, the name Mundelein George Mundelein, which I mentioned, you can use that for personal names. So this is something that we can use. Auditoriums, these are all things, awards, banana trade. Alamo, San Antonio, Texas, that's the official subject heading. So this is something that is critical in using. The other thing is to really, when you start using terms, authority files, I would use in your file folders something that is short and distinct. Now here I put OLG, which probably is, that's Our Lady of Guadalupe, which is not a subject standard heading, but for me, 605.14 is the record group and the sub-record group for Our Lady of Guadalupe Parish in South Chicago. So that's what that is. James Tort is there. St. Jude Police League, St. Jude Novena Book. So this is basically what you do. Now, in closing, I would emphasize that, that standards, although seemingly problematic, really applied in a simple workflow, are very valuable as they connect materials together and serve as a permanent bridge between the current archivist and one's predecessors and successors. The human memory can only go so far in applying standards to your collection that will leave a lasting legacy. This information can be ultimately manipulated, and in an archive content management system, which provides the structure necessary to comprehend each archival collection, can be modified. And I think that's the critical thing, because once we go to an electronic format, basically we can change it if we see a better term or whatever. So that ends my presentation, and I will turn it over to Holly. Thank you.
Holly, you're welcome to start whenever you're ready.
Holly, you're muted.
Just a second.
Oh, there you are.
Trying to get I did the order of operations wrong. Huh. Mm-hmm. Oh, well. I think it's going to have to stay this way. Whoops, no. Is it only showing part screen now?
Holly,
Yes,
we can see the presentation. It's just in the, what do they call, presenter view or work view? I think there's a way, maybe under view, where you can go to.
Yes.
Go to slideshow.
You go to slideshow, you go to the bottom with the little TV on a stand.
Oh, yes, I see that there. Yeah.
The bottom on your TV with the stand will give it a full screen. The very bottom of your slide, Holly. No, that one, yep, right there.
Okay, back in track.
Yeah.
Is that correct now?
Yep.
Huh?
Yes.
Okay. Sorry, and thank you for your patience. For the purpose of this presentation, I will offer how it's possible to start adopting and/or improving standards. To help alleviate any trepidation, I offer that this is a continuous cycle, that every archive, no matter how basic or how refined, with the most up-to-date software and ample staffing. In other words, you can start where you are and make gradual progress. For me, this is a comfort and makes everything more approachable. So why? Part one, ethics. We as archivists are encouraged to follow an archival code of ethics and practice. I would like to bring forward a few commonly accepted points for this discussion. The archives must arrange and describe archives and make information from and about them available, according to guidance provided by standards, to ensure best access to and use of the archives while protecting the authenticity and integrity of the materials. This applies to physical, administrative, and intellectual control. 2, the archives must ensure continued accessibility of the archival materials. This refers not just to how to store and manage them today, but also how to develop and maintain the infrastructure needed for the archives years into the future. Why part 2? Describing the archives. Describing in the archives encompasses 3 parts. We must discern content, structure, and context, then describe who, when, and why documents and collections were created, then how and when did archives receive them, as well as what happened to the records before and after they came into the custody of the archives. That information is then brought into descriptive tools such as finding aids to understand the content and nature. They are the keys to understanding collections. With this, there is the creation of access or intellectual points, such as names, subjects, dates, or events. Describing archives and its collection is not an immediate process. It takes time to discern and understand the context of the records. For us, charism is an overarching why for activities that created the records. It also lends to the organic nature of religious collections and relationships to one another. Description is guided by standards and guidelines. So standardization, it allows us to build and apply consistency of use, which in turn eases and promotes greater access and understanding. It brings efficiency to access. Data content standards help control the process of description by identifying elements of information to capture an archival description. This leads to the use of consistent archival descriptive tools, promoting a shared language across institutions. This is important to religious communities in diminishment whose collections are to join a collaborative archives or be donated to a university, as they will need to be brought into a content management system such as ADAM. A descriptive element is a discrete piece of information about the body of the archival material, such as the name of the creator, dates of the material, physical extent, or nature of the materials. These are access points to guide or assist research. Each element can have a preferred list of terms, a controlled vocabulary. An authority list is a list of standardized terms for the given descriptive elements to be used as preferred terms to help find relevant information when using resources. This can be built up over time and refined as needed. Authority control is a process of selecting and confirming terms or names to be used as access points when describing archives. These are authorized or controlled forms of personal or corporate names, geographic names, subjects, functions, forms, numeric identifiers, etc. It ensures that language is used consistently, supporting retrieval and use. It allows data to be linked. Each controlled entry in the authority record documents relationships and is described in terms of scope and usage to assist maintenance. Authority control is built by descriptive elements and data content standards. Why am I pointing this out? It gives us the foundation for this discussion. I also believe it is important to review our why. And frankly, it can be used by archivists in discussions with leadership. A few things that I want to mention. Description. Describing your collections are vital. It is the key to understanding and putting collections into context and defining relationships. As Sister Downey has stated, if you don't tell your story, someone else will. Access. Providing access begins with considering the mandate and purpose of the archival institution, the scope and nature of archival holdings, and the needs of potential users. Thus, archives are for those who created them. Our leadership and sisters are our primary users. Archives support the mission and offer value to the community they serve. Archives can assist with fundraising. They are meant to be active. Responsibility. Religious archives hold the stories of communities, sisters, and their ministries. They hold evidence of the legacy, mission, and charism. I believe that we as archivists, and by extension, our community leadership, have a responsibility to care for the archives and ensure its preservation and access into the future. Archives that are closed need professional support to get them to the point where they can have access. For example, while deceased sister files may be restricted, if there was a practice to place photographs, academic papers, personal publications, documentation related to their ministry within the restricted deceased sister files, they should be documented for intellectual control by inventory and ultimately an index or finding aid for the individual, but removed from the restricted file and placed according to record group for access. Religious archives should have the financial and professional support to build policy, procedures, intellectual and physical control to the level they need to be seen for their full value, an asset to the community. I also wish to recall the sentiment, again, of Sister Ginger Downey that she brought up during her September 9th Collaborative Archives discussion. Her insight of canon law speaking to the care of the members in the mission, and thereby also speaks to the archive's role to hold and care for the sisters' charism, mission, and vision through the preservation of their records, because it documents where the community has been and where it is going, thus representing shared value to be included in the discussion and responsible care with its members and mission. Developing and defining a logical workflow or process which incorporates basic fields necessary for compliance with standards improves access to archival collections. When I started here in October 2019, I had to generate the policy and procedure as well as create a processing manual. For me to do this, I had to find and review any existing administrative records and then compare them to the archival holdings to learn what system existed, the archival record groups, and if there was any previous work or actions that had occurred to or for the collections. While creating the processing manual, I also generated the forms and file management system to support my work for the archives. Within all of this, I incorporate standards and authorities with defined use. I primarily follow the Society of American Archivists adopted describing archives, a content standard. This is commonly referred to as DAX. The beauty of DAX is that the descriptive elements can be used to create any type or level of description of archival materials. It is practical and allows me to incorporate the descriptive elements from acquisition through accessioning, description, and finding aid while making them available in various formats and through various software. It provides me the structure for authority control. DAX access points fall into 6 broad categories: names, places, subjects, documentary forms, occupations, and functions. I will show how the access points or elements that fall into these categories and how they can be used shortly. Where defined, I'm also referencing the Library of Congress search authorities and their Mark 21 format for authority data, as well as the Getty Research Institute vocabularies. These are authority headings to be used. These give me the foundation to gradually build my local taxonomy and authority list by providing terms to adopt. So let's start with names. And for this, we're showing the Library of Congress authorities. And I want you to notice for heading, it says Scott, comma, space, Macrina. She's one of our sisters, and they pulled this and made an authority based on some of her publications. But what about birth and death dates? So for this, I'd like to show you another one. We have work by this brother, Mel Meyer, in our collection. Notice that there is no space between the end dash and dates at the top next to heading. And then if you look further down, you're going to see those 400 fields. Those are different alternatives. So you can start seeing how if you don't choose one to be your authority, how you can start having problems. And so the top heading is the authorized, the 400 fields, those 3 at the bottom, those were alternatives that have been recognized, but not the authority. This can get complicated. For a giggle, I looked at Mother Teresa. Now, if you look at the top for her authority, it is very different than, at first, I didn't know what to think hers would be. So Teresa, Mother, and Saint doesn't necessarily come first to mind for me, but that is her authorized heading. Now you think about international appeal and how prolific that she was with her work and across the world. This comes into a factor. You look down below and you see those 400 fields. There are 26 alternative recognized alternatives. This is why it's important to choose an authorized, because you could get into a real mess very quickly for searchability. So how about subjects? This is a view that I generated from the Getty, and I'm looking at rosaries. Now, when it presents on the Getty, it's one long streaming presentation. Here I've had to take 3 snapshots, and we're going from top left down and then over to the right. And these are snippets, but the point is you see that rosaries is in plural, and you can look down below to the additional parents and you can see how they've done their logical order and their hierarchy to see if that fits what you would like. You also can go and look at their sources to see, is that who you approve of, or do you feel that it's appropriate for your local recognized name? Okay. So now we're back at our DAX access point categories. And I'm providing a sampling of what I'm using here. So you will see that I'm going back to the names and we're looking at Sister Macrina Scott. Here I've chosen locally to add her birth and death dates because that is important. I also recognize that some places, I've looked at, say, a Catholic University finding aids. They would have potentially gone, I have seen one example where they would have gone for something like Scott, comma, Sister Macrina, comma, birth and death date. I am choosing to stick with the heart of the Library of Congress approved headings. I choose elsewhere to give, what would you say, how I prefer to use, like in her title for her finding aid, I use a different way. You also can see, which gave me a little bit of getting used to when I first saw it about 8 years ago. For instance, Denver, Colorado. If you're using this in an itemized sense, you're seeing Denver and then you see the Colo. And it's not how I initially thought you would see it. But you also see that countries are pretty much how you would expect to see it. You can see, if you go down to subjects, please take note for Catholic schools, the school S in schools is lowercase, just something to keep in mind, as well as under occupations, hospital administration, the A in administration is kept in lowercase. An interesting point on functions and activities, the authorized heading under the Getty was ministries. I am choosing locally to go with ministry. Just a point of reference there. Okay, let's pause and review the concept of finding aids. Finding aids provide information related to the context and contents of the unit being described and can include a variety of descriptive tools prepared by the archives. They can include information about the type, in other words, a list, an inventory, a calendar, a register. Medium, is it a card? Is it electronic? Content, and this could be the name of the correspondence, it could be subjects that are being discussed. A number or identifier for the finding aid, if any, and any relevant information about its location and availability. Finding aids can also be prepared by the creator. You're more likely to see this in cases of offices may have their own finding aid, and that can include registers, indexes, transfer lists, or classification schemes. These can be very helpful to the archive. Descriptive tools provide a representation or means of access to the materials being described and enables the archives to identify materials related to their inquiries. Each archive will likely consist of various types of finding aids, each serving a particular purpose. In DAX, each element has its own set of to offer. So it has its own purpose and scope to define the specific information appropriate for that given element. And any exclusions are provided with which other element can be used to provide related information. Elements are mutually exclusive. Then the descriptions provide sources of information to assist the archivist where to retrieve the information for the element. And lastly, general rules for the element provide instructions for use and offer examples. DAX provides the structure for authority control. I consulted these throughout generating my policy procedure forms and especially creating my finding aid template. Now let's review how DAX can be used in a finding aid. DAX descriptive elements and authority control were reviewed and built into the finding aid template that I use. The template and style guide are available as PDFs for you to use and adapt. I believe that Veronica will be sending these out, or Sarah later on today. I admit that when I'm creating finding aids, I always have my copy of DAX nearby for consultation. I will start with the finding aid for the records of Sister Macrina Scott, OSF. For the sake of time, some elements will not be discussed. So here we're looking at creator, and I offer the template description of how I want it to be seen and any instructions if somebody else was to be helping me out, like eventually volunteers or interns. And then I give the example of use here where I've talked about before, what's last name, comma, first name, comma, and then birth and death dates. Title, here's where you see that I am choosing to use a different recognition. I do not use those are cut out. And the title for this finding aid is Records of Sister Macrina Scott, comma, O period S period F. And that's where I'm recognizing that she is a sister and that she's Franciscan. How about dates? I try and have options here depending on the size of the collection. So her collection spans her birth and death dates, but the bulk of the material when she was most active is from 1982 to 2004. I feel that this is important to recognize, especially with her collection, given her publications and her activity. How about quantity? And here's where you're going to see that I see this as a gradual process and recognize where I'm at right now. My finding aid is dated and it's labeled as draft. So for quantity and how many linear feet versus record cartons, here I have estimated 13 linear feet, and I give how many record cartons and boxes are associated, and that it needs to be rehoused, and this will be reevaluated and updated. In fact, this is even in my finding aid. It's highlighted in yellow to make sure that that is noted. Collection summary, I want to go into identification. So here's something that has been something that I've been working through, going from an academic setting to religious. So I offer my record group number and the code that is for that record group. And I am still trying to work through how specifically to identify the collection and what code to use. Once I solve this, I will go back and update it. But right now, it's showing that I'm a work in progress. I'm being honest here. Abstract. Here's my point of view on abstracts and finding aids. Ultimately, I see this as one of the last things that I do. And because it's primarily being pulled from, in this case, the biography and scope and contents. So I offer this up now with the idea that once I finish truly processing the collection, I will review this. Note that I'm giving you an abbreviated form, but I offer her birth and death dates. I offer her primary work. I offer the materials that are present, and any locations in particular. But again, this is abbreviated abstract. Access and use. So for physical access and use, things to keep in mind. I think that this is important to mention because, and not overlooked, because it says what is going on for you right now and how somebody in the future, whether it's an archivist coming in after you, what they will encounter, or for anybody trying to access the collection at the moment. So in this case, I'm saying that there are no restrictions on the collection. However, I'm using the term off-site. For me, that means it's not in this exact building, it's on the property, but I'm using off-site because it will need preparation time if somebody wanted to come to see it. Access and use related to reproduction. Here, I think it's important to state this, especially since things can get tricky when it comes to reproduction of anything. And I state here that not all materials in the public domain and that the researcher is responsible for addressing this. Subject. So here you're going back to indexed terms, and this is where it can be very helpful to have your authorized list for searchability. And I say where I choose to look for them and that they need to be reviewed. So here are some examples: Catholic literature, biblical teaching. Notice that the second word for these are in lowercase. And then here's an expanded one. Because of Macrina Scott's work, I say Catholic Church, and it should be dash dash, changed over in PowerPoint, education, and Denver, Colorado, because I want it to be very specific that this was a local education. Organizations. With her, this is very important. And I'm also using kind of, I would say locally recognized because of not being able to find things, say, in the Library of Congress. So that's a local authorized use. So I have that we are the Sisters of St. Francis of Penance and Christian Charity. And I note this is in particular Denver, Colorado versus, say, somewhere in New York State. We're talking about her work was primarily with the Catholic Biblical School, which is in the Archdiocese of Denver, and I say Colorado. And the Wisdom Center, that was in Marycrest, and that's in Denver, Colorado. The Wisdom Center and Marycrest are not in the Library of Congress, but it's locally recognized and very important for us. And so again, you can see options for occupations, religious educators, and such. So here we go. How did I get my abstract? Here's one place that I go for information. I spend time to try and help the researcher, either by developing a biography or history. The biography is primarily used for persons, whereas history is for organization. You choose one, not both. And I state what I think is important to note. Dates, people or connections, locations, memberships. And this would be a case here for saying the secular versus religious name. That's one place that I'm choosing to use it. But again, you would need to decide on locally what you want to have in your biography or your history. Scope and content. Here, it's important to state the dates. And I also say the bulk of the dates for her. And we talk about subject areas and document types. Below, I give you an example of what I used for Sister Macrina Scott. And in here I go talking about her primary organizations with relevant dates. I also talk about the types of documents. I talk about where her work was. And I also note here that, again, we're a work in progress. If I find something very important through processing that isn't immediate, I can go and update this. Here's a tricky area that I'm finding a big difference between what I've done in the past versus religious collections. Acquisition and custodial history. Much of the collections here are technically transfers. We do have some accessions, not all formally recognized. We're working on this. Since I've come on board, there are formal accessioning. But it is important and it would be helpful. I don't always know exactly when a collection was transferred here. I have to often review the materials and infer it. Custodial history. If it's coming from a sister, that's one thing. If it was something where it's a combination of things to include an office, that would be really nice to know, but I don't always have it. However, this is very helpful in research to know when and who and why, and to have this in there. So it's something to be built up. In the case for Sister Macrina Scott's material, I have to deduce this, and based on conversations, I say that it was a transfer made by an administration. She passed away in the spring, so I say that it came by the summer of the year that she passed away. Appraisal and processing, again, a tricky area here because not a lot has been documented in my case from before when I came on. I don't truthfully know in a lot of cases were there choices made to dispose of anything. And that would be good to know. I don't always know necessarily what processing may or may not have gone on. And so I document what I find and what I will do, but I don't always have the past for that. Again, here in another area, separated collections and related collections. I don't necessarily have the history of that, but I can document what I do. For related collections, Macrina Scott stuff, she has information in her deceased personal files. She also served on our provincial council, so that's another related collection. Academic papers, she was in different offices and committees, so that's another record group I can indicate. There are photograph collections elsewhere with Macrina Scott, as well as published works. So those I have noted down for her finding aid. So here, I've been debating how to generate full finding aids. Do I wish to put the time into generating EADs or stick with the Word documents that can be rolled to a PDF? This spring, a sister and an IT consultant and I finished creating our community website, so I can at least link PDFs to the website. However, I will be testing Atom, a content management system, out by winter. I've also been given the directive to have the archives move to a collaborative within a few short years. I also need the administrative records and content management system to a point where this can be ready for that endeavor. At the moment, I am focusing on getting intellectual control of the collection so I can write record group and collection summaries. Part of this is included improving housing identification and expanding inventory levels as needed. I'm applying standards and improving authority control as I go. I'm operating on the premise that if a request comes in that justifies the allocation of time, I will generate a finding aid to the level that meets the need. I do have a few collections in mind that I would like to prioritize to a file and multi-level finding aid due to their value to the community when time and/or assistance is available. I dream of a non-COVID life to be able to get volunteers and interns. In summary, adopting or improving standards is a continuous cycle at every archive. You can start where you are and make gradual progress. Just a quick note before I hand this over to Jaja. There have been recommended resources and contact information, as well as that finding aid and style guide that I mentioned before, that have been sent through Sarah, I think, to Veronica to be given out later. And with that, I will stop sharing my screen to allow Jaja to come on. All right, Jaja, you're on.
Thank you very much. I moved because I had a notification my internet was unstable, so I hope that this will be fine. I'm very pleased to be presenting today. Thank you, Holly and Malachy, for inviting me to join this panel. So as Malachy and Holly have been sharing, standards are central to the management of archives, and it's the hope of the three of us to impress on everyone the importance of using standards in your archives. And we're glad to be able to approach this and give insight from different angles. So for my section today, I'm going to be talking about the value of standards as it is used in the world of archival databases. And I really hope to build off of what Holly and Malachy have shared. So as a disclaimer, I use the database called Access to Memory, or ATOM, in my archives. So for example purposes, I'll be mainly speaking about this database, but I don't intend it to be any kind of push or promotion for this particular software. It will just be for example purposes only. And I also didn't want my presentation to be too technical. So forgive me if it seems too simple, but I wanted it to be more accessible than really overwhelming. So we'll just start with what is a database. I brought together a few definitions that I found online into one, and it says a database is an organized collection of structured information or data designed in such a way that the information within can be accessed for later use by a computer. So the key in this definition of database for our panel today is the idea of structured information. In effect, we're talking about having standards for how the information is put into the database. For example, as Malachy and Holly have spoken about in greater depth, rules for how to write names for individuals or geographic places or subject headings. Having standards in your archives really is the first step to moving towards implementing an archives database because it helps structure the information so it's useful and meaningful. So in terms of talking about standards in database, I would like to address it from two perspectives today. First is access, and the second is accuracy. So first, access, as we've talked about also in a lot of depth during our panel, access really is at the core of what an archivist is called to do. The reason we inventory records and label photographs one by one, we create finding aids and file lists, is also that the records can be found when needed. Databases are a tool for access, and content standard is a foundation on which that is made possible because they provide useful and meaningful information about what is in the archives. A database essentially brings together all the aspects of a finding aid or description that Holly was sharing about, and it makes it more organized and searchable, and it also links areas of description to show relationships. One way a database does that is through access points. Access points are essentially points of entry that guide access to materials. So these can be personal or corporate names, subject terms, geographic locations, types of materials. Archivists must standardize the terms used for these access points because it allows the database to connect information together with greater ease and efficiency. So a few examples I had that I'll go through because Holly already went through in really well in good depth. So one is creator, and these are names. On the left is a screenshot from my database. They're names of people, parishes, and friaries that are responsible for creating a body of records. So you notice for each one, I decided to include the city because I wanted to distinguish between ones that had the same names. So each of these creators links to an authority record that has biographical information or historical information So in this example, because it's a seminary that was housed in the friary, I also linked these two. At the bottom, you can see as a related entry for the friary in Regina. Another one is, I'll just skip that one. Another one is place. So these identify the geographic locations of the record's creation. So we have the province, so Alberta, Canada, but we also have the city. So at the bottom, for example, Cochrane, Alberta. So we can use these places as access points to narrow down what places and what types of records were created at that place. So for this Regina, Saskatchewan, there were three. There's a seminary, a parish, and a friary body of records that were related to these places. So these access points are all useful in the database because they are controlled by naming standards. So what might happen, for example, if there wasn't this type of control? So in my database, I chose to write out the full province name. So Regina, Saskatchewan, you see on the left, instead of Regina SK that you see on the right, which is the postal abbreviation. I decided to do this because I didn't want to assume that everybody accessing the database would be Canadian and they would understand what the abbreviation meant. However, if I didn't keep it consistent in the database and I decided to use both interchangeably or one at a time or whenever I felt like it, and I didn't link both to one description, what would end up happening is that some descriptions in the database would end up linked to one and some would end up linked to the other. And if anybody went to search in the database and they clicked Regina, Saskatchewan, they might only pull up one set of records and not another set that is just as relevant, but not linked correctly. So this is a really good tangible example of what would happen if there wasn't any kind of standards in the database. And it's a seemingly insignificant decision, whether to write out the full name or use the abbreviation, but it has a huge impact on access in a database. I did simplify this example considerably because there are ways around it in the database to link it together. But it generally makes a database a lot messier and harder for people who are just learning how to use it. So we can see that implementing simple standards, even at this level, can impact access to archives in a database. The second point I wanted to talk about is accuracy of information in the database. A great description from a book by Laura Miller, which is included in our resource list. She says, all content standards serve the same purpose. They aim to help archivists capture consistent and accurate information about the who, what, where, when, why, and how of archives. This is not only for access, as I've talked about previously, but it's also related to accuracy and consistency, to have a standard vocabulary to describe items. So the who and the where we've talked about briefly, but I'd like to just talk a little bit about some of the other ones in relation to the topic on accuracy. So the what, physical description asks what kind of materials are there? And so there should be some kind of standard, at least for your individual archives, on how best to describe the amount or the type of material. For example, if you wrote photograph or you wrote picture, there are two different meanings to what they are. So photograph is very more specific, whereas picture, people could read it and think it could be a drawing, it could be a painting, it could be a photograph, but the terms are not as accurate. And related to physical description is physical extent, which Holly also talked about. So how much of the material is there? There should be some kind of standard on how best to describe the amount. So I have had some colleagues that count out how many pages are in a really small file, and they write 5 pages. But then I've also had other colleagues that just estimate the width of a file, even if it's just 0.2 centimeters or 2 millimeters, instead of counting out the pages. So even a little difference like that makes a huge difference in people understanding what is there. Another one is when. So there are also standards on how to write dates in a way that people looking at the archives database can understand the scope of the records. This table is just an example of the different ways you could write years if you're uncertain about the exact dates. It can be pretty nitpicky, but this is just an example. So for the 4 at the bottom, for example, the 18-9- versus 18-9- with a question mark. So if people weren't on the same page about how to present a date, then people looking at the date will understand it differently. Whether it means that they're certain about the decade or they're questionable about the decade, it makes a big difference for people accessing and wanting to research with the records. Another huge point in relation to accuracy and consistency is the idea of collaboration in the archives, not only within your own archives among your team, if you're fortunate enough to have volunteers or staff, but also between other archives, as Holly and Malachy have brought up the idea of collaborative archives. There are different types of databases. So some, like access to memory, is web-based, while others just reside on your local computer. But databases do open up the opportunity for more additional helping hands in the archives and space for collaboration between archives. This is because having standards in database guarantees accuracy. So it means that everyone who is working together speaks the same language. So I have 2 examples from a personal experience to illustrate this point. So first is an archives assistant. So the administrative assistant at the Friary regularly has extra time in her schedule. So I began training her as a part-time archives assistant in the summer of 2020 to do simple processing and archival description. She's over 70, and so she was really hesitant about venturing into this world of databases. But because we follow the Canadian standard, which is the Rules for Archival Description, or RAD, I could easily give her a guideline on how to write a description. And with these guidelines, it became very simple to create archival descriptions because it's almost like filling in the blanks. And that's how simple it can be to implement a standard in your archives. It can be like filling in the blanks for required information like title or physical description, and then just have certain rules about how to write out the information in each field. And that's exactly like Holly's finding a template. A second example is I'm on the database committee for the Archives Society of Alberta, which is our provincial association of archives. The ASA uses ATOM, or Access to Memory, as a place for all member archives institutions to share and pool their archival descriptions together for greater accessibility. And it's called Alberta on Record. ATOM can support multiple institutions, and so there are currently 63 different institutions across Alberta that add their descriptions to this database. And it's not perfect, but because we have a description standard, which is the Rules for Archival Description, all the descriptions generally have the same information in the same fields, and it's easily transferable onto the database. So whether collaborating with colleagues or volunteers in your archives, or with the greater community of archival institutions, maintaining content standards in the database allows consistency and accuracy for users of the archives. So as I mentioned, the archives database I use is called Access to Memory, or ATOM. An important reason why I chose ATOM is because it's standards-based. And I encourage that to be one feature you look for when you're considering an archives database. So ATOM was originally built with support from the International Council on Archives to encourage broader international standards adoption. Standards compliance is built into the core of ATOM, and it offers templates that conform to a wide variety of international and national standards. It's also import and export friendly because it also complies with metadata exchange standards, so you could import and export descriptions really easily. So in conclusion, for each of our panel presenters today, I hope you can see how standards overarches all aspects of archival work, not just the hands-on processing and creating descriptions, but also central to the foundation and the continuity of archives. My encouragement, just as Holly's is to take it in steps. So it doesn't mean you need to go from zero to suddenly implementing a database system, although that is very much possible. But it's important to start somewhere with a goal in mind. If the goal of your archives is to work towards a database, then take steps to move towards that. And it can be as simple as just starting to label your file system the same way as Malachy talked about, or even starting by creating a standards-based finding aid. And I would like to echo Holly to just say that it is definitely an ongoing process that happens in all archives, whether big or small, young or old. All archives need to go through this process, but the process has to start somewhere. So as we continue this work of safeguarding the heritage of our congregations, I'm really pleased that I can share with you all about databases and standards. So thank you very much for your time. I'm not an expert in databases in any way, but I'd be happy to email and discuss further with anyone who would like more information or more insight. My email is there, and I also included the link to my database if you're interested in browsing it. It's archives.franciscanfriars.ca. Thank you.
Okay, well, thank you so much to Malachy and Holly and to Jaja. We really appreciate this. I have gotten some questions that came in through the chat, so I think I'll go ahead and read those first. And then if there are other questions people have from the floor, please feel free to just either type them in chat or unmute and ask them real quick. But I do want to say, you know, thanks to all three of you. I think sometimes this concept can be very daunting in the way that it sounds to people who are not really implementing any of this, but you have made it seem accessible. You have made it clear, and I think hopefully people feel a little more confident that they could start somewhere, even if it's just using some consistency in the way they describe things in their collections. So the first question that came in was for Malachy, and it was, does your name authority taken from the OCD include a geographic location for the places?
When I do use subject tracings, like we only put them in Content Dam right now, you would put Our Lady of Solitude, and that would be parentheses, Los Angeles, and then comma, CALIF period. Now, the issue here is those for, and the ILL is Illinois. That is the General Printing Office. I think, what is it? All the old abbreviations from the 1950s. And I think they do not use mail codes because mail codes are now internationalized and they don't want to confuse that. So Library of Congress, you have to get used to that, uses the General Printing Office, GPO IDs for states. But I do that as a subject tracing, yes.
Okay, thank you, Malachy. This other question I think could go really to any of you, and it is, I have been using the Getty Thesaurus of Geographic Names online. Is there another source that you would suggest instead?
We use the Getty all the time. The big thing with Getty when you put it into a content management system is that you have to have between, it would like, say, for example, Chicago would be North America, South America, space, dash, dash, space, United States, space, dash, dash, space. Then it would go on with Illinois, Cook County, Chicago. But the key thing is you have to have the two dashes have to be separated by a space because it will not read it. And that's something you learn when you put stuff in. But Getty is probably the most accepted one, and I think easy to use, and it's right online.
Okay. Another question came in that I think all of us can relate to, and that is, in the headings for people in the naming authority, how do you deal with religious names? So if you want to have your both, or somebody's gone back to their baptismal name, what do you do in that case?
I'm going to pass on that because we never had religious names. The Claretians, by the way, not me.
Can I jump in? A couple of things. That is a problem, and it's going to be especially a problem if you lock yourself into the Library of Congress. I want to say a couple of things about the Library of Congress because I used to work there. I was head of the music archives, and I can tell you that the archivists lock horns with the catalogers constantly because those subject headings just do not work for both. So lots of times we have a problem with that. So I think if you want to look at the subject headings, that's a good thing to start your authority. The other thing is, I think we have to be pretty careful saying that the Library of Congress is Protestant. While we were doing this, I just looked up Access Point Eucharist and I came up with 1,408 records. So it depends on what the catalogers put where. There are also records on Muslim sources, Jewish sources in different languages. So it's kind of not a good thing to say that the Library of Congress is Protestant. The other thing I wanted to say is that some of us who work for communities that come from Europe or Canada or somewhere else might find ourselves locked into authority systems that have been set up for us. So that if I were to go in, I'm processing a collection now for transfer someplace. If I were to go in, I can't change what has been set up before me because it hooks up with the general archives in Rome and the archives that's in Canada and the archives that are in Latin America. So I kind of have to I have to pay attention to what is there traditionally and not get hooked into, reinventing the wheel. But you do have a terrible problem with sister names. We also have a problem with the community that I work with because for a very long time, they were called mother so-and-so and then went back to sister so-and-so. So you're gonna find their religious names in many different guises.
I will add, this is where I think defining your local use is critical. So for instance, here under creator, yes, I'm not recognizing putting the sister in, I'm going with last name, comma, first name, choosing their religious name. Where I'm putting the secular or name changes, I put that prominently in their biographies, and I put things like that also in their note field. I make sure that the title for their collections say, spelled out, not abbreviated, sister, and for instance, with my example, Sister Macrina Scott, comma, O period, S period F, because I also want it to say that she is Franciscan. And I define that in my local use and where I use that locally. But I think you do need to figure out that and put it in writing locally.
Yeah, I'd also like to add to what Holly said, because very much we understand the context of our own archives. And so in the example that I gave with the place names or the creators with the parishes and then where they are, that was a standard that I decided to implement myself for my own archives. But exactly like Holly said, it needs to be documented somewhere that this is what we're going to do and how we're going to do it in our archives. And so that future archivists or even researchers coming can understand the standards that your archives are using. And this is not to say make up all your own standards, but definitely we understand our own context of our own archives the best, and what we need to do to make the information the most clear and accessible.
If I could just comment on the Library of Congress subject headings. Initially, it was a lot of Protestant terms. It has changed. The more frightening thing right now, and this was I found out through ATLA, American Theological Library Association, is they only approved when Andy Carter was a representative they only approved 14 terms in 1 year. So there is not a great love of creating new religious terms in LC. And that's very problematic. And many of you know that they dropped Bible, New Testament, Bible, Old Testament. Now it's just Bible. So that is always changing. And the key thing is really to say, how are people going to find this information if the standard terms are such that are used? Now, we all remember when the term Negro was part of the Library of Congress, which was phased out in the late 60s, early 70s. So that is an issue that we always have to be aware of. And it's not perfect, but it's a standard, unfortunately, at times.
One other thing I'd like to say is Dee mentioned how, say, you're tied or locked into a system that may go all the way back to, say, a general in Rome. Things can get more flexible once you get to, say, having a digital repository. This can be separate from your internal, and in there you can do mapping that helps translate where certain fields will go, but you can also add to that to provide information that wouldn't be provided currently. And that's one way that, say, technology can be an advantage and also at the same time helps access into the future.
Just to comment on what Malachy said, maybe if they're only allowing a certain number of authority names or subject names, don't rely on them anymore. I mean, they're fighting a whole different battle. They're a library, and believe me, that's very, very different from many arguments I've had, very, very different from how to process. Cataloging an item is very different from processing an item. And so maybe if you try to be a little more flexible and don't lock yourself into their problems, if they are having problems and only generating new subject headings. And I think I can tell you why that is as well. They have their own IT issues. Creating bigger systems creates problems for them. It's a whole internal mess. But I think we have to think outside the library box and keep thinking in terms of the archives box. And you're right, Holly, things are changing all the time. And Jude, I'm sorry, how do you say your name?
Jaja?
Jaja? We can change things. In some cases, I think though what we would put online still might need to be approved by our home archives. I know in our case it would. I wouldn't be able to put anything up unless Rome said, oh yeah, that's okay.
Okay, well, we're about coming to the end of our time. I would just like to point out also, we've heard mention of a lot of different naming authorities here, which all are good and all have different aspects, which I think are helpful for different kinds of materials. One that we haven't mentioned is one that's specifically used more in museum collections for objects. And that is, Chenal's is the accepted nomenclature that you use for that. So for those of you with large object collections, that's another naming authority that you might want to consider becoming familiar with, just so you know, you can easily find that your collection holds, 52 baptismal fonts or something. You know, you need to know what your stuff has by using a standard nomenclature so that it's always going to show up and you don't call it 5 different things. Okay, are there any other, so I'll put that name into the chat so that you can see it, because I get some questions about it. Does anybody else, I see Holly has another question.
Also to know, if you do, DAX is offered, we give the link, offered freely. In there, they give you specialized sources for like authorities. So if you're looking for those kind of niches like Sarah mentioned, they go through and they have a couple pages worth of places to look. So if you can't find it, there's a way to look around in creative ways, and DAX has a resource of a few.
Okay. Are there any other final questions or comments anybody would like to make? All right, well, thank you so much to the 3 of you. This was very interesting. And Veronica, are you going to come back on? Otherwise, I think we will be taking a break for 30 minutes and then picking back up here again for our final talk of the conference. Oh, Veronica's got the thumbs up. Okay, I guess we're all good to go. Well, thank you, everybody. Please sign back on and we'll be back in 30 minutes. Welcome back to our final session of the afternoon. It is entitled Charism and Creativity, Catalogues, Management, and Innovation in the Felician Sisters North American Province Heritage Center. Our speaker is Sister Grace Marie Del Priore, and she will be presenting an overview of the planned Felician Sisters Heritage Center for the North American province, demonstrating how pooled resources and application of best archival practices will ensure preservation and access to the cultural heritage of the Felician Sisters. As before, if any questions occur to you during Sisters talk, please feel free to type them in the chat and I will read them out afterwards. You may also ask questions at the end. So, Sister Grace Marie, please take it away.
Hey, thank you.
Don't take it away. I forgot to read your bio. Don't do it yet.
Okay.
That's my mistake. Okay. Sister Grace Marie Del Priore is a Felician sister. She has been the archivist for Our Lady of Hope Archive from the North American province for 4 years. She lives and works in Livonia, Michigan, in the Felician Sisters of North America Heritage Center on the Madonna University campus. Sister Grace has a master's in Library and Information Science from the University of Pittsburgh and a master's in elementary education from Seton Hall University. She is a member of the ACWR Technology Committee and also an active member of the Society of American Archivists. Recently, she submitted a review of Who Will Write Our History, a documentary about the secret archive in Warsaw during the Holocaust, to the American Archivist website. Now, please take it away, sister.
Okay, good. So, the title of my presentation is Charism and Creativity, Catalogues, Management, and Innovation in the Felician Sisters of North America Provincial Heritage, Province Heritage Center and Archives. And the front picture is of the new building and Heritage Center that I'm going to talk about. The title, and in fact, the content of this, comes from a response to a Vatican call for papers from a year or two ago with a very similar title from the Pontifical Council for Culture. And as I was doing research and preparing that paper, it seemed like it would be a good presentation as well. The requirements of that paper was basically to talk about preservation, how we can use consolidation and acts of protection to form best practices and replicable models for preserving heritage now and into the future. And certainly that colors a lot of this presentation, but I would say my presentation has a simpler purpose, which is to demonstrate how the new Felician Heritage Center and Archive will preserve the legacy of the Felician Sisters of North America. So first of all, who are we? We are an international order of women religious with our generalate in Rome. We were founded in 1855 by Blessed Mary Angela Trzaskowska in Warsaw, Poland. And we are currently in 5 provinces, 3 in Poland, and also in Brazil, in North America, and we have a vice province in Kenya. So our charism and our mission is important to who we are, but it's also important to what we're saving in our archive. And so I include this. Our charism is to imitate Blessed Mary Angela's boundless love of God and surrender to God's will in compassionate service, total availability, and concern for the salvation of all people. Our mission statement is, as Felician Sisters called by God, we cooperate with Christ in the spiritual renewal of the world. So this influences what we do and what's important to us and what we save. Our Lady of Hope Province. So as I said, we started in Poland. In 1874, 5 pioneer sisters came to America, to Wisconsin, to serve Polish immigrants. In 1882, there was growth in the community. It moved to Detroit, Michigan. And in 1936, it moved to its present location, where a former province is, in Livonia, Michigan. And the community continued to grow and expand across North America. The stained glass window that was visible from the picture on the front slide is symbolic of where we've been. So each of the sides of the shape have a name of one of our former provinces, which is now a region. And they're all names dedicated to our Blessed Mother. And they are names that we continue to hold as convent names, but they're part of Our Lady of Hope provinces past and present. So as I said, they are former provinces. In November of 2009, 8 provinces merged from Livonia, Michigan, Buffalo, New York, Chicago, Illinois, Coraopolis, Pennsylvania, Lodi, New Jersey, Enfield, Connecticut, Rio Rancho, New Mexico, and Mississauga, Canada. The reasons for us merging, coming together like this, is something I'm sure many religious communities are also experiencing these days. Convents closing, sisters withdrawing from schools and other institutions that were very much populated by sisters when there were more sisters, decreased numbers in religious life in general. But ultimately, we wanted to continue to have a strong mission that could continue into the future and needed to change the way we did things to accomplish that. Currently, there are 450 sisters in North America, and we have ministries in healthcare, social services, pastoral ministry, housing, and education on all levels. So the importance of the current archive and the archive that we are establishing is to preserve our Felician heritage and legacy. And things that we very much want to preserve are represented in our schema. So things like our beginnings, our foundations, government on general and provincial levels, about our sisters, about our different ministries in education, healthcare, and others, our formation, our spirituality, and things that aren't Felician but are directly related to us. This schema was developed by one of our sisters around the time that we started to use FileMaker Pro. All of this was done, even though we were separate provinces, they were done together. All the archivists got together and started a concerted effort to preserve our history as one. Another aspect that colors what we preserve and why we preserve is our Franciscan spirituality, which can be seen in our Felician spirituality and in the core values that we have and have in our institutions, which are markedly Franciscan, but also certainly Catholic and Christian, and that affect how we live and what we do and what we save. So we are in the process of consolidating our archives, which means that we are bringing them together from these locations to one. Couple of exceptions, we have one in Canada, and because Canada does not allow these archives to be moved across the border, we're not doing that. Hopefully in the future, we'll digitize them and have them accessible that way. And also one of the archives has already been moved, but there's still a lot of moving to be done. There are benefits to consolidating the archives. One is to form a consolidated institutional archive, which is actually one of the top 4 choices of what kind of repository you would have when membership is declining. Also, to have renovated and expanded storage area, to improve access to archives for researchers, because they are together, and starting a digitization program. We currently are not doing that. In the past, we tried, but it was tricky because we were all spread across the United States in different locations. So hopefully once everything's under one roof, we can get back to that in a more effective way. To have an improved record management program, a more professional staff. You know, in the past, sisters did it, and some of them did have the training and the education, and some of them, it was just their next ministry, you know, and certainly they knew what it meant to be Felician, but they learned on their feet in the archive. Also, having a partnership with the university ensures future stewardship. So our consolidation is in the university, which is not just a university, but actually one of ours, which is a sponsored ministry, Madonna University in Livonia, Michigan. Oh, I'm trying to move it and it's not moving. There we go. Okay, thank you. So as I said, we are consolidating it at our university in Livonia. And per the Boston College Conference results, the favored location for consolidation is either in a mother house or a college or university. And that location is actually both for us because we have a former mother house there and the college that is there. It allows us to integrate the archival collection with curriculum for instruction and research. It could be a place for students to come and integrate it into the classes. Again, professional staff will be important. We can have a proper climate controlled environment. You know, now we're sort of in makeshift rooms where we do the best we can, but we can actually have a building that is built to be an archive. A better application of technology and expertise to describe and make available archive collections. And also to use that technology and standards for better privacy. So about the new location, Madonna University, Livonia, Michigan. It was, as many of the sisters' universities were, founded as a junior college for our sisters, but later opened to other young women and all students. In 1982, it instituted a master's program, and by 1991, it was a university.
You know, it's, oh,
Yes.
I had breaks.
Breaks, and is my voice breaking up?
I'm not hearing that, sister.
Okay, then I guess I'll just keep going. All right, so Madonna University, it was ours from the beginning, as I said, and so very much formed by the sisters. In fact, for as long as we could, the college was led by the sisters. The sisters taught the classes, had daily interaction with the students, and that is not the case at this point, but we're very much involved in imbuing our laity, all the professional staff there with our values. And so it's very much part of the mission of Madonna that it be a Catholic institution with Christian humanistic values, and within that Felician Franciscan tradition. So Madonna University and Livonia, it's significant for another reason. That convent was, as I said, part of the first Felician province in America. So very much key to our history in this country. And even the location on the property in that southwest corner of the campus is the front porch of the university, as the president of Madonna said in a recent speech. So it was strategically chosen. It was the old path to the convent that would give you the view that is pictured. And you can see on this map of the university, and the bottom in yellow is the location of the Felician Heritage Center, and as I described, by the main entrance. So the Madonna University Welcome Center officially has these goals, these purposes. It's to be a physical demonstration of the university's commitment to providing a caring, personalized, value-based learning community, to blend the past, present, and future, to integrate the university's mission and core values, and be a first point of contact for future students, to significantly enhance how the university recruits new students, celebrates alumni and donors, and preserves its Felician history, and to have the space for exhibits, offices, multi-purpose space, art gallery, events, and our Heritage Center and archives. Of course, is our Heritage Center and archive. So the purpose of the archive is stated here by our provincial minister at the time, Sister Mary Christopher Moore. Archives contain the living history of an institution, school, or even a family. Archives can open up a window to the past and can light the way to the future. She spoke at the groundbreaking, and I want to show a section where she speaks. So let's see how this goes. Okay, here we go.
For today, let us say, Deo gratias, thanks be to God. Thank you, Mr. President. This time I'm delighted to introduce Sister Christopher Moore, Provincial Minister for the Felician Sisters of North America, the founding mother of several ministries from healthcare to childcare and education, Madonna being one of those ministries. Sister Christopher will describe to us the Felician Sisters of North America's Heritage Center and archives and what it means to our dear sisters in the Madonna community. Sister Christopher.
I used to say that if it rained on a wedding, that meant it was going to be a happy marriage. So we can just convert that a little bit and say it's going to be a wonderful project and bring all of us much happiness. So we just accept it. To many people, the word archives conjures up a vision of a bent figure pursuing a pile of dusty books or papers. That's not how it's going to be with our project that we move forward today. Archives contain the living history of an institution, a school, even of a family. Archives can open a window on the past and can light the way to the future. The recent interest in Ancestry.com and other Find Your Family websites demonstrates how popular genealogy has become as a way for people to tell their stories. For the Felician Sisters, this means carefully preserving the documents and objects that tell our story and help to pass it on. With this Archives and Heritage Center project, we the Felician Sisters intend to fulfill our responsibility to keep alive our sacred history, to tell the story of the Felician mission and ministry on this continent, to catalog and preserve significant documents of the past, to identify objects that support the narrative of our history, and to invite visitors to participate in the sisters' vision for the future. With the establishment of the new province of Our Lady of Hope in 2009, we found the opportunity to consolidate our archival holdings, which had been in 8 separate places, into one state-of-the-art facility. The new Heritage Center will include traditional archival material, as well as space for an exhibit area that will preserve and propagate our history, especially on this continent, and will look forward to the future of the Felician Sisters in the years to come. This project represents a collaboration with Madonna University, as we will be sharing some common space in the Welcome Center with the university, while keeping our own area, both a public area for the Heritage Center and a private area for the archives. The ceremony today brings to an end the dreaming and design phase. Now we must dig in and get to work. With God's grace, we will all meet back here in 2021 for the dedication of this new center. Thank you.
Okay, so it's a bit about the purpose of the building and the center. Let's talk about the design. It's kind of an overview of what it was planned to be. The Felician Heritage and Welcome Center is there in the middle, and it's also in the basement, but you'll see that. There's a viewing garden and a garden of remembrance. It's kind of a look at the whole building as designed, of course. You know, in the middle is where the exhibits and the Heritage Center will be. There's event space, as you see on the right, gathering space, the top left. There's art exhibits and other rooms on the main floor there, and then the archive, the stacks, and the offices and rooms in the basement.
We're still seeing the video clip.
Oh, sorry about that. I thought I switched well. Let's try again. Okay, can you see the slide now?
Yes.
Okay, but you heard me before, so that's what I described with the building as an overview. And that's looking inside it. So again, that's the event space to the far right. The open in the middle will be for the exhibits and Heritage Center. And on the other side, top down, is sort of gathering space. And then there's an art room, you see by the paintings, with other offices, university offices, not ours. And the bottom is the archive with the stacks and the archive rooms and offices. So this is the main floor. This is where the Heritage Center will be. It's actually not completed yet, not because of any delays, it's the last piece that will be done. And actually, currently, the archives aren't there either, but I will also describe that. So the Heritage Center is in the number 2 place, the big open space around the middle on the main floor. And this is the upper and lower floors. So the upper floor has the offices for the university. The university has opted to put many of their offices, things like human resources there. And the lowest floor is the archives. And then it's the Garden of Memory, as described in the other slide. It's dedicated to the Felician Sisters in a general way because of their shared history with them and knowing them personally and connection to the values, but also dedicated to the sisters who died during COVID. We, especially our sisters in Livonia, Michigan, were hit hard by COVID, and we had 13 sisters die in a short period of time. So it's partly dedicated to them. a little more about the plans for the archive section. This is an overview in the form of a blueprint of the whole thing. So you see on the left is where the stacks would be, and the right is the rooms and the offices. So this is a better picture of a blueprint of the rooms and offices. You see there's a reading room, prep room, IT room, a director's office, other necessary rooms. So the construction process. Groundbreaking was in May 2019. It started with the estimation that will be done in a year. Well, it was not, although it was done by 2021. And progress was slow. It also stopped for 2 months due to COVID and issues related to that. But by May 2021, Madonna University was able to move in its offices and some of its services, its staff, into their section. So here was pictures from the groundbreaking. Yeah, the crowd gathered, the sisters there, the provincial minister with the president of the university and the archbishop of the local diocese, and Archbishop Vigneron giving the blessing. And the bottom left is our council, sisters in leadership, with the president and the archbishop. So construction, some images of what that looked like. When the last beam went in, there was a ceremony. So our sisters and friends of the community came. The last beam was signed by those present and lifted up into place. So construction as it was almost finished on the inside. So as I said, there were complications, and there continue to be complications with the construction and finishing the building related to COVID, not just stopping in 2 months, but the complications of things slowing down. You couldn't get certain supplies from certain states because it was a red state, things of that nature. Also, the ground in the area was below the water table, which resulted in like a super saturated ground. And so the building had to be constructed, especially the basement, with precautions to keep the building from flooding. This was envisioned as a partnership with Madonna University so that, we could have kind of a continuation where our sponsor ministry would sort of, when needed, take over the archive, pass the torch, so to speak, and that it would be accessed by students who would be exposed to the history and the culture and the values of the sisters. As this continued, the university's vision for the building has evolved so that there currently are no student services in the building, and they have not moved the other archive into this building. So it's a lot of offices, and the event spaces are for potential donors and benefactors, although students can come in the building. There is an unclear delineation of responsibility there, basically because of maintenance, so that it's a building on the university property, but it's the Felician Sisters section of the building. So when something needs to be done, both sides are saying, but it's not our jobs. So we need to be clearer in that regard. Also, the Felician sisters involved in this project are not on site. They're not even in Michigan. So there isn't someone there to notice that that wall hasn't been painted yet, or, things are very slow, or that doesn't look right. So we get a sense of what the completed building looks like. That's an event space at the top there, the art section, the lobby. There is that stained glass window that can be seen from the front, hallway, event space, and sisters and an employee in front of the completed stained glass window. As I said, it is largely a place where they have their offices, so there's a large office section. The Heritage Center is still in process. This is what it currently looks like. Again, that is not a delay as much as it was the last piece that we are going to work on, but that is its current status. The Heritage Center and the archive have the goal of preserving, promulgating, and honoring the history and legacy of our sisters in North America. By envisioning, creating, and implementing a center to house the Felician Sisters archives, artifacts, and a center that engages the public in our history through a dynamic, interacting area. You know, to be hands-on. It's going to be an interactive experience that crosses centuries and continents, basically follows our journey, addressing public's questions and concerns and continuing to be aware of those and to have temporary exhibits that reflect those to keep it relevant. The experience will start with a 4-dimensional film that recreates our journey to North America, what that looked like, and guests will follow that path that imitates that journey. They'll focus on how the sisters have mirrored Blessed Mary Angela's call to respond to those in need with joy. And it will feature several stained glass windows, as you saw some, more one, that include the saints and the Blessed Mother as well. The areas of focus will be the sisters' history, our impact today, American Catholic history, American social history, spiritual inspiration, and reflection. So let's talk about the process of moving these archives to Michigan. First, we are developing a common section in the archive. Certainly each local area has their own records that are individual to that area, but there's also things they have in common, things that came down from a general level, things that we all did, things that we all read. So to put that together into a common section without the repetition. A big part of this was coordinating and communicating with local archives. This is an interesting process. Some local archivists from these archives were helpful and cooperative, and some were not. You know, I think it's hard sometimes to let go and to let the archives not just leave your building, but leave the state. So there's a little bit of resistance with that, but we are moving forward. We hired RDT Concepts as a company to help move archives, all of them, to Livonia. So a bit about their preparation. They did a walkthrough. They sent representatives to walk through and measure the archive boxes, our supplies, to see what they're going to be needing to move. They oversaw the construction by the construction company, which is good because, as I said, those of us who are a part of this were not there for that, although Sisters in Michigan were. We had meetings here and there about the progress and a timeline, and then there was a second walkthrough later. So I currently am not in Michigan, I am in Connecticut. We have not moved the archive yet. There are some small projects that still need to be done, although it is largely ready. When the moving time comes, RDT will send a team that will go to a local archive sites where they will load all the documents and artifacts and onto the truck to bring them to Michigan, where they will be staged, inventoried, and quality checked. They'll be placed into a high density storage system where the document boxes will be labeled with barcodes of their shelf location, which will allow the moving team to use a barcode reader to keep track of the boxes And as they scan them to update the storage software package, it'll be remembered and we can use it in the future to locate these boxes and keep track of them. So as I said before, one of the benefits of having a new building is it is built to be an archive with all the environmental aspects that are necessary. So there is climate control, a fire protection system that will of course protect from fire and protect the documents as much as possible. Lighting that is environmentally friendly and friendly to what we're preserving. And security in order to protect the records and the artifacts. So certain parts will be open to the public, like the exhibits when they're ready, the reading room, but other places will be protected by a series of locked doors and other security measures. So to get a sense of our storage and equipment, this is from RDT paperwork. And we see that there is shelving with all the measurements, how many openings, file drawers, an art rack, flat files. We're having a moving carriage system that is in a lot of new archives. So we have this with mechanical safety sweep for precautions. And these are images of what is described in the last two slides. So the different forms of storage that we'll be using. So this is a later blueprint of the stacks. It's a two-system stack that actually makes up one large system. So it's 86,204 linear filing inches with open storage, double stacked flat file cabinets for maps, blueprints, things of that nature. 160 linear feet of art racks with storage for pictures, portraits, other hanging objects, and drawer storage as well. So the first system, which is for the smaller items, has 17 movable carriages. So it's the mechanical assist system, 17 movable carriages and 2 stationary platform units and aisles that exceed safety requirements for a space needed in between. The second system is the art rack system with the wide carriage and the space for these hanging items with the safety sweep feature and wide aisles. So here's an image of what I've been talking about, that moving carriage system and how it looks so far. We do have all the shelving in, but they are bare because the archives haven't been moved yet. So there's the flat files and the art racks. So this is the archive as it looks currently. This is the prep room and the director's office. They are mostly painted and mostly carpeted. You can see the prep room is not. That's one of our small projects. The director's office has a wall that needs to be painted. These are small things that need to be finished before we can have a date for the move. Archivist storage area, heritage IT room, the reading room. It's the prep room again. So in conclusion, the Felician Heritage and Archive Center will better preserve the Felician legacy through a new state-of-the-art facility built to archive records, a professional staff, consolidating local archives, which will allow for better care and digitization, partnership with the Felician University, a sponsored institution imbued with our charism and core values, partnership with the university as an opportunity to provide access to researchers and the general public through the archive and the exhibits, and consideration of past, present, and future needs. Sources of the information One of these sources is here today, so I want to thank Sister Eleanor Craig for the interview, which was very helpful. Here is my contact information. Thank you for your attention. Are there any questions?
Thanks so much, Sister Grace Marie. That was really interesting. I'm sure I'm not the only person very, very jealous of some of your equipment. Flat file row, that about knocked me over. I need a lot of those. We have some questions that came in, and I have some others as well that I noted down. One of the ones that Casey just asked, and I also was curious about, is what, how you talked a lot about, the nuts and bolts of this operation and what it's for. How is it structured relationally with the university? I mean, did the sisters fund the whole thing? How is it going to be managed going on into the future with the university? Do the sisters own the building? Do the sisters rent part of the building? I mean, what's that relationship like?
I don't have too much to do with that. I think we'll pretty much be functioning separately, as separate parts of the building, doing our separate functions. I think it is sort of a university building that we have a part of, with a view of in the future, when there isn't a sister to be an archivist, or when maybe there aren't sisters in that area, that down the road the university would care for our heritage. And so it is, I think, a university building.
Okay. And then, so are the Felicians, is the archive space only for the Felician archives? It won't house Madonna University's collection as well? It's just for you?
It's just for us. They have us archive in another place, another building, in fact.
So, and then will you have, I saw that there were multiple offices in there, so will you have a good sized staff in there?
No, it's meant to be with one archivist. There's one director's office. The rest are reading room, prep room, rooms of that nature. I mean, certainly there's room for volunteers, or maybe hiring someone down the road, but they would have to share an office.
Okay, so you're actually moving from Connecticut to go and be the boss.
Yep.
Okay, that's exciting.
It is.
Well, I have some other questions, but here's another one that came in. Are there any records that are considered current files that will be left in the local provinces or the local areas?
Not in terms of like the paper, like the document boxes, but there are like things that are artifacts that are being kept in the local areas that we are not bringing to the exhibit area or the archive. That's partially because, we need to be strategic about what we bring there, but it's also partially, we don't want to take everything. They should be able to have their own heritage rooms, their own, to keep some of these things, but we will not be moving all the artifacts that they have.
Well, I'm curious about the actual moving, once everything gets there, because having done this a few years ago myself, I know some of the pitfalls that come later. How are you working out what people will be doing in terms of letting others know in the different geographic areas where to find you, where to make it be known that now there's this unified repository which is going to be holding things? So when you get outside requesters like former students or people who were at other ministries that you had, how are they going to know where to find you?
I mean, I imagine that once the move has taken place, that information will be given to the local people who can pass that information along. We have a website, we have a social media presence. I imagine we use all those things.
And here is the question that was posted. Will the sisters' personnel files stay local or will they be moved?
I suppose that depends on what the files are. I mean, there are certain things that need to stay local, that because of immediate needs or, they're not helpful across the country. For the most part, they will be moved unless they are really needed locally.
in my own community had that challenge with a Canadian province and having to leave things there. What is the community's sort of long-term vision for the records that are in Ontario? We were fortunate enough that our mother house is in Canada, so our Ontario records can be housed at the mother house archives, but it doesn't sound as if that's true for your community. What is going to happen with the Ontario records long-term?
There isn't really a plan. It seems like we will need to digitize them in order to have access to them in other places, because we can't move them across the border, and our current mother house is outside of Pittsburgh in Beaver Falls, Pennsylvania. So I think once we are able to do that, we should, but for now, they're just there.
Okay. There's a note that came in from Mary Ann saying that the Felicians donated a considerable sum towards the construction of the building.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, we did.
Okay. Are there any other questions from the floor? Do you have a content management system for all collections? That's from Holly.
The closest thing we come to it is that when we introduced FileMaker Pro to the community, the sisters, the archivists in the different areas did start to use it either right away or later. So we have that across the board.
Having gotten a bunch of stuff from a lot of places, I know that a lot of it came in you know, I was told it was all going to come picture perfect, but it really didn't. Have you instructed the archivists in other locations to have things in uniform boxes? Has that been part of their process, or are you going to have to do a lot of rehousing when things come eventually?
Well, the way RDT works is they are telling everyone not to pack anything, so that when the company comes in, they're going to pack everything in their way, but also a consistent way. So everything's going to be packed the same, and we've been told emphatically, do not start packing for us. We will come and we will do it.
Okay, and here's a question that kind of relates to that. How are you going to integrate the barcode system into the management system?
I'm not sure. I mean, at first they'll be separate, right? Because they will be separate, but I mean, certainly they do need to be brought together.
And you get a big congratulations for this beautiful new building. That is very exciting. I have a question, one last one, about your exhibit space, and that is, it sounded as if the overarching Felician exhibit is maybe intended to be a permanent exhibit. Is that true?
Some of it will be like the interactive pieces once they're created, you know, and made, and about our journey from Poland to Wisconsin and all of that. That part will be permanent, but then there will be others that will rotate.
Okay. All right. Are there any other questions? Okay, I'm not seeing any. Well, sister, thank you so much. What an exciting project. I'm sure everybody hopes you'll put in an article in the newsletter to let us know how the opening goes.
Thank you, everyone.
Next, we'll be inviting Casey to do a wrap up and a word of thanks to those who participated in the conference throughout the month. And then I believe she's also going to share a bit about our upcoming strategic vision.
Everybody, we've made it through September, through the many sessions that we've had throughout the month. I wanted to thank all of the attendees, presenters, ACWR board and committee members for helping make our 2021 conference a success. I would especially like to thank Veronica Buchanan, our trusty executive secretary, and Sue DiTullio, who is our web administrator, for their untiring efforts to plan and execute our first virtual conference. Much appreciation to the Technology Committee and the Paper Reading Committee for enhancing our program. I hope this final afternoon of sessions piqued your interest and offered new thoughts and insights for you to consider. Throughout September, from the waning summer days to the now emergence of fall, we've shared lessons on grant writing, digital records and emails, archives collaboratives, the vital relationship between archivists and communicators, and much more. Now we're about to step into October, American Archives Month. So take this opportunity to experiment or begin a new project. ACWR cannot wait to hear what you're working on, commiserate with you during your challenging times, and celebrate your successes. I would like to offer a few announcements. You've heard them earlier today, but I'll just a reminders before we end our conference. First, Sarah Cantor and the Mentoring Committee will be offering Mentoring 101 Q&A sessions later in October. So please use that opportunity to connect, ask questions, and seek advice for any kind of archival issue. That will be announced on the ACWR listserv. I would also encourage you to submit an article, editorial, or announcement for the fall issue of the ACWR newsletter. That announcement will again come in through the listserv. Mentioned earlier in the conference, the Catholic Native American Boarding School Accountability and Healing Coalition seeks information about Catholic records related to Native American boarding schools. So if your collection includes such records or you know the whereabouts of Native American boarding school records, please contact ACWR. Finally, we look forward to your feedback about our 2021 Triennial. Please complete the conference evaluation form provided by Veronica via email. Your responses will be utilized for planning future conferences and other virtual programming. Now, I'd like to take the remaining time, or a little bit of time this afternoon to discuss ongoing and planned initiatives by the ACWR board. As the new president of the organization, I hope to address 5 key issues. And we hope to create an updated ACWR vision and strategic plan to address each issue. First, and this is something that's been within our strategic priorities for several years, is to address the critical threats facing women religious archives due to closures and mergers by enhancing and expanding our mentoring committee and creating a plan to assist religious archives. Secondly, to appeal to our shifting membership needs by offering resources specific to professionally trained lay archivists working in religious archives for the first time, and continuing to assist sister archivists with additional educational opportunities. We will be making a concerted effort to reach new members with connections to LCWR, CMSWR, and UISG. The third issue regards internal governance and delineation of duties within the ACWR board. Thanks to our new president-elect, Lisa, we hope to create a standing board position for a Catholic sister archivist, both to pay homage to our founders and maintain a voice for religious on our board. Another important issue pertains to ongoing and future educational opportunities. We will be evaluating our triennial conference structure, exploring new digital opportunities, and identifying ways we can address the most pressing needs of our members. All of this will require a concerted effort on behalf of ACWR to strengthen, renew, and create partnerships with affiliated organizations. Several of our board members will meet next week to discuss the strategic plan, as well as a comprehensive archives assessment survey. Our aim is to conduct a comprehensive survey of women religious archives in order to compose a report about the current status and future needs of women religious archives. Why would we need such a survey? Without a comprehensive survey, archivists, leaders, and scholars will never have a factual understanding of the current status of women religious archives, nor will we be able to leverage that information to improve archival conditions and staff. Archivists have acknowledged that there is a deepening crisis about the tenuous future for many religious archives. And by supporting and participating in an archives assessment survey, congregations will contribute to a global conversation. They will have the opportunity to evaluate their own archival realities and connect with ACWR for guidance or assistance. And so just final words, we welcome your input in regards to all of these upcoming initiatives and the conversations around them. If you have suggestions or comments as we evaluate the future of ACWR, please feel free to offer them now. I'm going to stick around on Zoom for a few minutes. You can also contact the national office via email or by phone, and we would be glad to consider any new ideas or suggestions for any of those things. The ACWR board is at your service. So thank you again for your attendance and support throughout this past month. It's been so wonderful to see your faces, even on Zoom. And please have a wonderful afternoon.